Okay, well, welcome everyone to the meeting. We're still waiting for Tommy Sheridan to come, but what we will do in his absence is we will start with that well-known socialist candidate for the NEC before he was expelled, organiser for Newham Labour, and that's Roger Silverman, who I don't think needs any more introduction. Roger, over to you. You're unmute. You're still muted.
Right. Hi, comrades. Yes, Newham Socialist Labour is really all that was all the best elements of the two CLPs in Newham, West Ham and East Ham, that were shut down without warning already 15 months ago. And we decided to form Newham Socialist Labour. They didn't bother expelling most of us. I was expelled, but the most of the other comrades are not, because they completely shut them off from any participation in the Labour Party by simply shutting off the two CLPs. This is a borough where Keir Hardie won the first Labour seat in Parliament, where Sylvia Pankhurst was active, and just down the road, George Lansbury was leading the Popular Council in a something that's the inspiration for us now in refusing to carry out the Tory cuts. And we stood candidates in the borough council elections recently. Our candidate for mayor got over 5,000 votes. Our candidates for individual council seats, at least 2,000 people, we reckon, voted for us, and we really challenged the local mayor and the corrupt councillors that have run and have ruined the area. By the way, one of the most deprived, if not the most deprived borough in the country, or in London anyway. So we are maintaining ourselves. We believe we're a kind of model for the shadow CLPs that we believe should be set up around the country, because really we represent all that's progressive and proletarian and socialist about that is left of the Labour Party. And I think we're on the basis of the huge upsurge which is now taking place, which we saw with the TUC demo, which was absolutely outstanding, and of course the rail strike and the coming wave of strikes that are due now. We're seeing for the first time for decades the working class standing up for itself and fighting, and we will play our fullest part in that. So I think the campaign which we're launching today is going to play a huge part in that. Thanks, comrades.
Unmute myself. Yeah, thank you, comrades. Before I go to Paula Peters, I should just explain that I have only taken over the chair at the last minute because our regular chair, Esther, has unfortunately injured her wrist. We are waiting at the moment for Tommy Sheridan, which is why Roger Silverman started off first. But if I can just give a very brief background, really, I mean, people are aware of the RMT strike and the other strikes which are in the offing and the cost of living crisis. But we do really face a crisis because energy prices will have risen from April this year to April, from April 2022 to September, to October. It will be 130% energy costs. And the windfall scheme that Rishi Sunak has been pressurised into will only be sticking plaster over it. It will not be a solution, and is not a solution for most people. All they will get is £400. So what I want, our idea will be, and it's up to people to organise this, but we do think it's one of the priorities, is that we try and organise along the lines of the poll tax campaign, a don't pay, won't pay campaign. So without me taking up any more time, if I can hand over to Paula Peters. Paula, she's an activist, incidentally, in the Disabled People Against the Cuts, and I think you'll have seen her speaking quite frequently at meetings, not least the Crispin Flintoff show. So over to you, Paula.
For some reason, I can't, my video has been switched off because the host has stopped it.
Oh. I haven't stopped it.
It says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Oh. Yes, you're right. Becky?
Yeah, Paula, can you try and do it now? You have to do it yourself.
No, it's not letting me do it.
That's very odd, because
Paula's video is showing is on. Paula's video is showing is on the.
Right, I should be on now. No.
No.
Ah, here I am. Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for having me speak to you all today. Can I just say it's Disabled People Against Cuts, DPAC. We don't have the in the title, and I'm on the national steering group of Disabled People Against Cuts. I also want to send solidarity from my trade union branch, which is Bromley and Croydon Unite Community. I've been chair of the branch for 4 years. I'm also the Equalities Officer for Bromley Trades Council, and I was recently elected chair of the London and Eastern Region Campaign Forum. So my workload's cut out, and I'm also the Observer Rep for the London and Eastern Unite Disabled Members Committee. As you know, the RNT have been on strike this week, the biggest dispute on the railways for 30 years. But I think we need to start with this, because obviously for disabled people, this is of huge concern to us, what is coming down the track with the Williams and Shapps report. And we found out, I'm on the Southeastern train line, which goes from Hastings into Charing Cross. And we found out that Southeastern are going to start closing our ticket offices. Well, they're going to start closing ticket offices across England from September of this year. When I was on the picket line yesterday outside my local station in Orpington, sadly, we saw agency workers already in place working while the critical safety staff trained staff were on strike yesterday. So I want to go through a few things that when you're talking to people who think it's about train drivers and how much they get, I just want to read through a couple of things that for disabled people and older people, what our issues are. So, you know, we rely on the ticket offices, not only to book tickets, and you get a wide variety of tickets from the ticket office you don't get on apps and online. And you also, the ticket office can actually give a better deal than the online services can. But disabled people often use the ticket offices to get advice on journeys, access issues, and just get information. And they're a vital service. And, you know, not everyone is on a computer. 1/5 of disabled people in the UK, and there's 14 million of us, are not on a computer, don't have access to a computer, and also don't have the skills, or it doesn't meet the access needs to be able to use it. And with further and further advancement of digitalisation, it's really excluding disabled people from accessing the NHS, from accessing the benefit system, from accessing council services, from access to the justice system with the tribunal service, and a wide variety of you know, systems. And obviously with universal credit being an online application and everything, this is another way to exclude disabled people from getting the support and everything they're entitled to. You know, not everyone has a smartphone or can afford one. And what Grant Shapps wants to do is replace the ticket office with a one ticket website where you have this app called the Great British Railways. And so your access needs are not met for an app, and over 5 million older people, you know, can't access a computer, don't have the skills to you know, to use one. And you need that face-to-face intervention. You feel safer with someone in the ticket office if there's a security issue or you've got an access issue. One of my local stations in Bromley last year, and you may have read about it, Bromley South, an RMT worker was actually stabbed, right, on the ticket office concourse for trying to stop a fare avoider from getting out into the concourse, and was stabbed. And when I spoke to one of the RMT staff, you know, a few days ago from the South on Tuesday, he turned around and said the amount of people that are going through the ticket machines and everything without paying tickets because they're open, and they're so frightened of violence, being attacked and everything, that they're just powerless to stop it. And especially since one of their colleagues has been stabbed as well, that they're even more frightened to do that, you know. So I think it's just, you know, there's a security issue, there's a safety issue, there's an access issue, and you know, for us it's just going to exclude us. And also ticket machines and everything are often vandalized outside stations, and I don't know about some of you, but I find them so complicated. When you've got people behind you, you know, it really kind of makes you feel a bit uneasy. You know, platform staff assist with dispatching of trains, directing passengers with information to get the right train to the right platform. They assist with using the ramp to get disabled people on and off trains safely. Now, a train driver can't do that. They have the keys to unlock the ramp, but they haven't got the training to use the ramp. And so guards dispatch trains, checking everyone is aboard and it's safe to leave the stations. Now, often trains are so long, the driver's video camera is often so small or broken that they can't see one end of the train or in the middle of a train. And there was an incident at Lewisham Station where a pregnant lady was caught in the doors at Lewisham Station, and she would have been dragged along the platform if the passengers hadn't have forced open the doors and got her to safety. And that's one of the reasons why I supported the RMT keep the guard on the train on Southern, because guards and conductors are needed on the trains. The rise of hate crime, racial attacks and homophobia, disableism and crime arising. On Bexley Heath, about a week ago, a young girl was sexually assaulted on a train and there was no one to assist her. You know, a guard on the train can radio through to a station if a disabled person's on a train and what carriage they're in, to tell the platform staff at the other end that they need to get off. But it's not only that. If there is a fire, the driver's taken unwell, there's a terrorist incident, the guard and the conductor can get people to safety and off that train to a safe place of access. And that is so important. You know, I know the huge anxiety of not being able to know if someone was going to be at the platform to meet me. I remember being on a train, I was on the way to the RMT picket line, keep the guard on the train in 2016 on my mobility scooter, and there was no one to meet me at the other end. And I had to call out to platform staff who weren't radioed through that I was coming. And they said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm 10 minutes late to get onto the RMT picket line." And the guy said, "Oh, I'm RMT. I went with Solidarity. Can you help me get off the train?" You know, platform staff have risked their lives to save passengers who've fallen down the side of the train and the platform, talked to passengers out of taking their own lives, rescued passengers where they've fallen onto the tracks and got them to safety. there was an incident at Chislehurst, the local station to me, where a wheelchair user was pushed onto the tracks in a hate crime incident. If it wasn't for a platform member of staff getting him to safety, that disabled person would have died. So it's okay for people out there, and I'm sure people saw Question Time last night, to say the network needs modernisation. But these cuts, you know, they lead to safety issues, exclude many in society from being able to access the network and travel at all. And without critical safety trained staff, you'll have companies that will cut corners and put our safety at risk. And without track being fixed with maintenance workers and the hours they put in, you can see an absolutely horrendous rail incident occurring, loss of life and serious injury. You know, and also we're seeing that they want to replace the critically trained staff with agency workers, which is downright dangerous. Now, agency workers, you know, they're not drug and alcohol tested. They haven't got the safety certificates. At my local station, Orpington, a year ago, an agency worker actually on the station was trying to dispatch a train when the doors weren't closed, and a disabled person was trying to get up the ramp. And if it wasn't for another guard platform staff member coming across to the platform and saying to this guy, "What the hell are you doing?" You know, there would have been a serious incident. But they thought there was something, you know, not quite right with the guy. And they found out, you know, he was high as a kite, and he was drug tested to be found he was 6 times over the legal limit with marijuana. So he put a whole train safety and a disabled person at risk. And if it wasn't for the critically trained member of staff, you know, who rushed in to help, there would have been a catastrophic incident on the network. You know, agency workers are paid a pittance, but it's to drive up the boss's profit. Now, we know that there are 2 agency companies on Southeastern who are using agency staff. And this is something we've got to do a serious pushback against, you know, because they're cutting corners to boost up bosses and profits. And these are some of the reasons why the RMT are on strike. Now, I met a train driver last week, actually, because As left a ballot in for strike action currently. And he actually turned around and told me that Johnson wants to bring driverless trains onto the rail network within the next 20 years. Can you imagine a driverless train on the rail network? The safety issues that puts our safety at risk. It's really, you know, concerning. You know, we're here also to talk about the cost of living, and I've got to say, we've had some serious incidences recently where disabled people have been subjected to dreadful hate crime abuse because of Rishi Sunak's recent cost of living package on, you know, for income related social security, a £650 payment to help towards your energy bills and cost of living. Can I just make this point incredibly clear here, that if you're on contributory employment and support allowance, and I'm one of those, you don't get the £650 payment at all. You know, if you're on your personal independence payments, you're on DLA, you get £150 payment at the end of September. If you're on income related ESA, JSA, you get the £625 50 payment. If you're on universal credit, but there are many groups that are missing out, and contributory benefits is one, contributory ESA is one of them. There are carers missing out. There are all kinds of groups that are missing out on this payment, and it is causing mass division in society. We've got to get that. Education is so important with this. We have got to educate the wider society about the welfare state, why it was set up, the fact that everyone pays with national insurance contributions and taxes. They're not handouts, they're not freebies. We pay into a system, okay? The welfare state was designed so that when you fell on hard times, you had social security there to support you when you were out of work and when you were too ill to work. That it's there for the state pension. When older people have retired, they get the state pension. It's not handouts, it's not freebies. We pay into a system, and that is one message we've got to hammer home. to the media and wider society. Sadly, we're seeing now a great many disabled people in absolute horrendous poverty with extortionate social care charging. And we're seeing local authorities now sending out bailiffs to chase disabled people for social care debt. And I'm sad to say that we have disabled people who are literally going without either eating or heating to pay extortionate social care charges, which is why it's so important that you support the End Social Care Charging campaign. We demand a fully funded social care system, free at the point of need, paid for by general taxation. We need trade unionists and the wider left to support this campaign to push the government back on disabled people having to pay up to £200 a week in social care charges. Why should older people who need care, who need social care support, who need to go into residential care, why should they have to sell their home to pay for their care? This kind of thing needs to stop. It really does. But we need your support to put a stop to it. Now, sadly, I'm going to end with this one. You know, I've got to say this, you know, we had a huge debate after the TUC demo. It's so sad to see the wider left still treat disabled people as an afterthought when they plan demos, when they plan marches, and when they have meetings. That the TUC on Saturday really completely ignored our access issues, thought it was completely acceptable to have a viewing platform behind statues where we couldn't see the stage, where we were out of sight and out of mind. I don't know what the TUC were thinking in the fact putting disabled people behind stone statues. They must think we're either superhuman, got x-ray vision and can see through stone. Well, I've got news for you, TUC. We cannot do either. We need fully accessible access issues met on every demonstration, and that disabled people are visible and our voices included on every platform, on every march, on every rally from here going forward. Because, and I will end with this, it's not just workers who deserve better, and there are disabled people who are workers. We deserve better when we have protests, when we have marches, when we have rallies. We need to be included at the heart of every campaign, because disabled people should be heard, must be heard, because otherwise the TUC, if their complaints are not dealt with, they can expect a very big protest outside the TUC HQ in London to demand why our access needs are not met, why we were put behind stone statues, and why disabled people will push to one side at marches and everything like that. We're not going to put up with it. And I just want to say to all of you, we are going to have a huge battle ahead with this government, because this government mean business. But it's only by uniting together, fighting together, but showing solidarity. Solidarity isn't a word, it's something you do. Solidarity is this, it's this. It's showing support to one another campaign and fighting together. Thank you for having me, everybody, in solidarity.
Okay, thank you very much, Paula. That was an impassioned speech, and I'll make sure that when I pronounce DPAC in full, it's without the, as it were. The next speaker is Richard Brenner, who is an activist from South London. Richard is on the kind of National Steering Committee for the Shadow CLPs to do with Can't Pay, Won't Pay, and the campaign that we hope to get off the ground. So, Richard, over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Tony, and thanks, Paula. That was absolutely a fantastic, eye-opening speech, and just brilliant and impassioned. What I wanted to do was I have to leave my video off, I'm afraid, because I'm not very well. But what I wanted to do was just very quickly cover three things. The first is the current situation. The second was around the cost of living, what can be done to end the cost of living crisis. And then third, what we can do about it as Socialist Labour Network and and beyond. So first of all, on the current situation, I think we're all feeling, notwithstanding a lot of problems that are continuing, not least what Paula said, but I think we are all feeling a bit stronger this week as a result of numerous things that happened over the course of the last week. First, of course, we had the fantastic demo. Second, we had the very solid 3 days of rail strikes. We've had polls showing a very strong public mood in support of the strikes. And of course, no one could fail to mention we've had Mick Lynch, who's been really standing out simply for telling the truth and being unflustered and speaking out for workers when the journalists on the TV have been trying to catch him out. And in particular, one thing that he said really struck me, which was when it was being put to him that a pay rise, with the RMT, of course, demanding a 7% pay rise, and only having been offered essentially 2%, and it was put to him that a wage rise would somehow cause a price spiral, and he said, no, this is a price wage spiral, not a wage price spiral. Prices are going up, wages haven't gone up, and that's why wages need to go up now, and other income, such as from benefits and pensions, need to go up now in order to stop people being pushed further into poverty. And this simple point has already started to enter much more widely into the way people are talking about the crisis. If you see the people that were interviewed on the streets around the by-elections on the TV, people were saying not just we can't afford to get by, but if pay doesn't go up, then how are we going to be able to match the rising prices? And the same obviously goes for benefits. You will hear that now being said right by your neighbours. You'll hear people saying it at work. There's much wider awareness of it because of struggle, because the RMT have taken those 3 days of action, because the NEU are balloting, because London buses are balloting, Unison are talking about a consultation and potentially balloting. And therefore, there's a strong sense across the country now, and that's not just England and Wales, but Scotland as well, that as Mick Lynch puts it, coordinated and synchronized action can start to make a difference. And as I've said, all the polls are showing that there is very wide public support. So what can be done? Can it be stopped? We'll get on to questions of what action can be effective later, and there are trade unionists here that will have much greater understanding of the issues than me. But when Boris Johnson talks about the cost of living crisis, as he did yesterday, and as he did this morning in the aftermath of his by-election defeat, he talks about it as if it's bad weather. We will get through this. They even talk about headwinds, like it's something that's happening to us, a natural disaster or something, rather than the behavior of people. But as we've seen in France, where the New Left Alliance there has raised very popular demands and has received a huge amount of support, the simple argument for a 15% pay rise, the simple argument that government freeze prices can win massive support. And we saw those demands being raised on the streets on Saturday, and we hear them being repeated now very, very widely. So these things can be done, and it's not necessary to wait until the next election, not least because the Labour Party won't commit to them, but to actually argue that government could impose a price freeze now. Ofgem, for example, didn't have to actually remove the cap on rising fuel and energy prices in the first place, and has actually done so in order to protect the existing monopoly providers from being undercut by cheaper providers of energy. So they've actually revealed that what they're regulating, when they claim to be regulating competition and the position of consumers, is actually regulating the profits of the monopoly providers and protecting them rather than protecting the consumer and the people. So we can argue for a price freeze. We can argue for a 15% pay rise, but there we've got another issue, haven't we? Because we know now that inflation is 11%, 9% if you calculate it according to the softer measure, 11% if you calculate it accurately. And for working class people in the poorest areas, it's more. But the fact is that we are reliant on all of these external bodies to carry out these calculations, and inflation itself is spiraling. So the RMT, good luck to them. We all support them. They should be given the 7% that they've demanded. But when you've got 11% inflation, and I'm not great at maths, but that's a 4% pay cut. And if the government demand that they give them 2% or 3% with an added productivity deal, even if you take 3%, right, then that's another. We're talking about an 8% pay cut when you take account of the 11% inflation. So what's clear is that pay needs to be indexed to inflation if people are going to be protected against the rising prices. And so that's why Socialist Labour Network and shadow CLPs have been looking at raising demands for a price freeze, raising demands for a 15% pay rise ahead of inflation, but also advancing the demand to index link pay against inflation. Obviously, there'll be companies that refuse to do it. And if they refuse to do it, they should be taken into public ownership. In fact, the utilities should be taken into public ownership anyway. Finally, what should we be, what do we need to actually do? How are we going to work to help deliver synchronized action? How are we going to work to deliver coordinated and synchronized strike action across these different sectors? And how can we bring relatively unorganized people that are outside of the workplace, highly organized but non-working people such as pensioners and the disabled? How can we bring young people into it? How can we bring the millions and millions of people that aren't in unions but are feeling the pinch on every street and in every family into the movement? And it seems to me there are two aspects to this. The first is obviously we need to organise as much support as we can for strikes that are ongoing and strikes that may be coming down the line. We had a brilliant example of the miners' support committees in 1984, 1985, and the Women Against Pit Closures movement, where at least where I was living in Birmingham at the time, our Trades Council, which was not exactly a very vibrant organisation to start with, but what it did was it just put out the call to everybody, to every union branch, to every campaign, every tenants association, to send a delegate along in order to help support the strike action. And we need to be doing that now. But we can also, as well as helping people to coordinate, what we can be working on is mass action against the energy companies and the retailers to demand that they cut their prices and to demand that the government impose the price freeze that has become so popular as a slogan in France, and which it's our responsibility to make popular here. So for that reason, it seems to me that, and I notice that Tommy is now here, but the sorts of actions that we undertook during the anti-poll tax movement start to come into focus. Because I can remember that during the anti-poll tax campaign, again, when I was in Birmingham, yes, we built up for mass non-payment, but in England, that came a lot later than it did in Scotland, a year later. We had all of the campaigns when people were being registered for the poll tax, in which we started to organise. And we got involved in campaigns where we lobbied the council, there were sit-ins, there were occupations, there were all sorts of preparatory actions that we took that weren't just passive, standing there with a placard type protest, which are valuable in and of themselves, but which really got in people's faces. And Tommy was absolutely at the centre of that. Steve Nally down in London, brothers and sisters from all over the country. I was the young man trembling at the back of the meeting when many of the people on this call will have been playing more leading roles in the campaign at that time. And it seems to me that by bringing people together in some sort of unified organisation, not setting up a little campaign of our own, but reaching out to the RMT, reaching out to the NEU, reaching out to the People's Assembly, writing a letter to Acorn, writing a letter to those national organisations, getting in touch with them in every locality to organise protests at British Gas in London, at British Gas in Glasgow, at British Gas in Cardiff, at Obam in Bristol, who own one of the big energy companies where their headquarters is. Then we can start to get in their faces, to maybe demonstrate at the offices of Ofgem in East London and demand that they cut their prices and demand those price freezes, get ourselves in the news, get in their faces and start to link people together. Now, and in that way, it would be a bit like the anti-poll tax unions, a bit like the miners' support committees, but in 2022, in the struggle that we face today, which is a struggle around pay, as well as a struggle around prices. And just the last thing I wanted to say, which was of interest, which was that the day of the demonstration on Saturday, I got my copy of the Morning Star, and I don't always agree with everything I read in the Morning Star. I'll say that straight away. I think it's a valuable resource. I think it's a valuable paper. I don't always agree with everything I read in it. And I read the editorial in it by Robert Griffiths from the Communist Party. And I have to say, I agreed with nearly every word of it. And what he said was that with the mass mobilization and the strikes coming up, and with prices rising and everybody feeling it in their pockets, that we needed an action conference to bring everybody together, rather like the All Britain Anti-Poll Tax Union did on several occasions. I can remember Tommy speaking at several of those conferences that we held, an action conference to bring everybody together and plan action. That we should draw up an action program, and I don't think he's talking about some very long, everything, including the kitchen sinks, like pamphlet, but some clear demands. And it seems to me like price controls, and like a 15% pay rise, and like indexation. And then what he also said was that we need to be looking in every town and city to build councils of action. Now, this is obviously a man who knows his history, because he knows that in the general strike, there were councils of action formed around the country. And I don't think he was trying to suggest that we are at that level at the moment, but I think it was just a simple way of saying, let's bring together campaigns around prices, let's bring together Acorn, let's bring together People's Assembly, let's bring together the workers that are striking and the workers that support them, and start to coordinate actions locally at every level. And I think where we come into it as networks of former Labour Party, current Labour Party, not for long members of the Labour Party, perhaps in many cases, with a network of shadow CLPs around the country, where we come in is that we can help to bring that into being. We can, through our networks, we can help to connect with all of those different campaigns, bring them all together and start to build that mass movement. The final point is about mass non-payment, because that, of course, was always made clear during the time of the poll tax that was what was going to stop the Tories, and in fact it worked. It was brilliant leadership on the part of the highly political activists at the heart of the anti-poll tax campaign that had the vision to see that that was what was going to do it. And I think there is a role for it. I don't think this is the same as the poll tax, but there is a role for it. What we're not going to have is a situation like we had in England, where everybody knows when the bills are going to arrive, and therefore we could do what we did in England and basically try and occupy all of the council chambers, which is where it really kicked off all over the country at that time, culminating in a massive march and a refusal to pay, because people are paying their energy bills, and people are paying for their food bills. But with the energy bills, they wouldn't be able to disconnect us all just by flicking a switch overnight. And therefore, there is the possibility, once we've done the work, once we've built up the organisation, once we've connected people on the ground, to set the date for some sort of protest of that sort, it seems to me. And when governments fall, when they can no longer govern, and that's how the mass campaign of non-payment brought down the Tories. That's how the miners in 2 successive strikes brought down Heath. And a wave of national strikes, synchronized and coordinated, alongside a mass movement refusing to pay the price of this crisis, I think can bring down this vicious, extremely right-wing, but ultimately quite lazy, disorganized and divided government. So I'll just finish that there and hand over to those that have an even better memory and greater knowledge of how that was done in the 1980s.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. As Richard said, he hasn't been very well, so our congratulations to him for that speech in the face of adversity. The next speaker that I want to take really needs no introduction, and that's Ian Hodson, who is the president of the Bakers Union. Ian, if you remember, was expelled at or around the time of the last Labour Party conference because his name was associated with Labour against the witch hunt. But I think we know really what Keir Starmer's agenda is about, and it's not sympathetic to the working class. We know he's threatened his own shadow front bench that they must apologise for going on the RMT picket line. I mean, what a complete disgrace that a Labour leader forces his own members of Parliament into apologising for being seen to act in solidarity with workers on strike. There's nothing I can say about Starmer that is bad enough. So without further ado, I will hand over to Ian. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation. And obviously, I obviously recognise this is an important step forward by this organisation to try and put together a campaign that so many people are facing. I think, you know, I don't know if people have seen some of the stuff that we've been doing this year. We set up what's called a People Powered campaign, which has been running a pop-up tent in the middle of Wigan, where we've been providing food and refreshments. We've been bringing along Greater Manchester Law Centre, offering free legal support to the community. 0 Hours Justice campaign to give people who are on 0 hours contracts an understanding of what their rights are, and obviously, you know, how we campaign to end them. And obviously around the right to food, the campaign that we're part of, which we've now formed a new working alliance called the National Food and Work Network, which consists of many different organisations with some aims which I'll cover off as I proceed. But I think, you know, as obviously the indication in relation to my introduction said, yes, I was expelled by the Labour Party, but it doesn't mean that the Bakers Union has exited politics. In fact, you know, it is our intention to stay and remain in the world of politics. We recognise that trade unions have to have a voice in Westminster. We recognise that voice needs to be representative of our class, and you know, we will support MPs that are currently in Westminster. We will support political organisations that have the same aspirations as we do as well, because we recognise that change has to happen both inside Westminster, but more importantly, outside of Westminster too, which is why, you know, we take part in quite a number of campaigns across various different aspirations to improve people's lives, whether it be about homes, whether it be in supporting DPAC, whether it be about the issues of low pay, whether it be about the abolition of youth rates or 0 hours contracts. You know, so as an organisation, we recognise that the best way to make changes, and would agree with the aims of this evening's meeting, to build a campaign around the issues that are really hurting people now in every community. Because if one thing I've learned this year by running those pop-up events has been that if you're seen, if you're in the community and you're speaking to the people who are suffering, you know, you can find out about how to deal with the issues that they face, how we can politically mobilize together to change our lives by understanding one another's aspirations and how we connect with one another too. I mean, we carried out a survey and found that, you know, in the middle of Wigan, a lot of people didn't even realise trade unions still existed. You know, we found out a lot of people voted for Boris Johnson because they thought he was funny. They wouldn't vote Keir Starmer now because they think he's smarmy. You know, it's interesting how people perceive what's going on politically. and how easily they're influenced by the media. But the only way we're going to counteract that is being visible. And I would agree with Paula when she talks about the need for the disabled people against cuts to be visible on trade union marches. On that march, by the way, whilst I applaud the trade unions actually, finally standing up and organising around the need for trade unions to do something, and I welcome the fact that it was about a new deal for workers. I think the date of the 18th of June was totally wrong. And I think that if you're going to organise an event, because we've seen so many in the past, that at the end of those events, there has to be some action. And what I would have liked to have seen, and if we're going to talk about dealing with the issue of fuel, is that we'd have all been asked to bring our tents along, and we would have camped out in Parliament Square, and we would have refused to move until they cut the bills, because I believe that's one of the best ways. That people would start talking about trade unions when they see us taking real action, as the RMT have done. When they see people taking real action, and then they hear the General Secretary talking the truth, talking in a language they understand, then they can communicate and connect with, then suddenly people's understanding of the issues that they're faced isn't alien anymore. It's actually real to them. People understand what Mick's talking about. They understand because the issues that he's talking about impacts their lives. When we talk nonsense and talk about issues that are irrelevant to people's lives, we're never going to communicate with them, and we're never going to connect. I mean, I know that obviously we normally like on the left to talk about, bureaucracies and talk about the issues that we think are important. But actually, what's important to people is how they survive this crisis, how they move forward, how they build a better life for themselves, how they build a better life for their families. How are they going to achieve it? They want to know how it's achievable. They want to hear, constructive ways in which we can all rise together. And I think that's one of the things that I've certainly learned as I've been going around the food banks across this country and meeting people who have to use those food banks, people who you wouldn't think would have to use food banks. We're talking teachers, we're talking classroom assistants, we're talking nurses, we're talking people in skilled roles having to access food banks because their money no longer gets to the end of the month and they can't afford to put food on the table. We did a survey. In that survey, 40% of the people that kept this nation fed told us they relied on the goodwill of their family and friends to put food on the table. 35% told us that they did without food so others could eat. And 7.5% of the people that kept this nation fed told us they had to access food banks. It's absolutely appalling in the 5th richest economy in the world, which is why I think it is important that if we're going to put a campaign together, we put it in a language that people understand and that they can communicate with and connect with, but also be prepared to respond about how we achieve it. Like I said, we put together a food and work network, and we got some, what I believe are reasonable demands. We're only calling for the earth, which is called for a rise in the national minimum wage to at least £15 an hour to guarantee all workers a living wage, an immediate and substantial increase in the universal credit, restoring the £20 uplift, and uprating all benefits to keep pace with rising prices and bills, and also removing the 5-week wait. Universal free school meals for every child throughout the year, and a ban on 0 hours contracts to guarantee workers predictable incomes that they can live on. And on the school issue, I mean, because we've run into a little bit of a problem where people say, oh yeah, but you're just going to give rich kids free meals. We're saying, no, it's not about giving rich kids free meals. It's about making children in school feel equal, that there's not some being treated differently because they have to apply for the free vouchers. It's about saying all children get fed, and then we use the tax system as a way of making sure that the children are fed properly, rather than children being identified as being the ones that are accessing the free meals. When it comes to what's happening in our schools, there's a story of what, and part of the reasons why, You know, we've as a union, we've decided that this is a really.
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you said.
Sorry, I've got Alexa coming in now. One of the reasons why, you know, as a union, we think this is really incredibly important is, you know, there was a school just down the road in Bolton. I was at a funeral, Dave Wilson's funeral in Preston. Some people may know him. And this guy has told me about his wife who was working in this school. For several days, they watched this young lad. They watched this young lad come in, pick his dinner up, wrap it up and take it home with him. Several days they watched him do this. So they then pulled him to one side and said, listen, we keep watching you come in and take your food, wrap it up and then take it out. Why? And he says, because my mummy and daddy have got no money, I'm taking my school dinners home so we can all have something to eat. The 5th richest economy in the world. These are the reasons why it's important that we organise. These are the reasons why it's important that we work a way of solving our differences and coming together to win for us all in the communities that we belong to. It's why unions need to work together to rebuild our movement. It's why that if we are going to have marches around London, there's a justification at the end about something that we aim to achieve. And I think it's really, really important now, you know, when we talk about this government, you know, that we call them out for what they are. You know, the last time we saw people transferred to a third country, you know, was under Hitler's Germany. It was a fascist move and it's fascist ideology that deports desperate people fleeing wars. And when it walks like a fascist and acts like a fascist, it is a fascist. And so for me, I think we have to be direct. I think we have to be organised. I think we have to be determined. And we have to call these people out when they fail to stand up for our communities. And when politicians fail to stand up for our class, then we must do it, but we must do it in an organised, comradely and structured manner that delivers for all people that live in our community. Thank you very much for indulging me. Solidarity.
Thank you very much, Ian. And I think we'll all take that to heart, that we do need unity on the left and also unity amongst the trade unions. But I will just say this, looking back to the miners' strike, that we had a unity in the TUC, but it was in essence around doing nothing, and that's why the miners lost. We need unity and also solidarity, which is not what we don't have from the TUC at the moment. And my great fear is that march was great last Saturday, but is it part of a strategy for winning, or is it simply an end in itself? But I won't take up any more time because I'm going to ask Tommy Sheridan to speak now. I don't think Tommy needs a great deal of introduction. He was the main leader and figurehead of the anti-poll tax movement, for those of us who can remember, over 30 years ago now. So Tommy, let me hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Tony, and thanks, brothers and sisters, for inviting me to participate in tonight's meeting. I thought Ian's contribution there was excellent, very inspiring, and an awful lot of very good points being raised. I want to try and address the question which the meeting poses. Is mass non-payment going to be appropriate in our current situation to a horrible right-wing Tory government that is bereft of any morality, a government that is probably, and we all lived through Thatcher, but this is probably the most obscene right-wing government in relation to their lack of care, their lack of humanity, their complete and utter self-indulgence. I mean, Boris Johnson's stories now are just incredible, and the documentation of his lies. Some of you will have seen the Peter Stefanovic videos, which I would recommend to everyone in terms of the number of times this man blatantly lies to people in Parliament, outside Parliament, at every opportunity. I believe his latest video has got over 45 million views, so it's not as if people haven't been looking at those facts. But we've got to, I think, be sober enough to ask the question where we are and where we want to be and how we're going to get there. Because where we are is obviously in the midst of one of the most ferocious attacks on working class families, living standards. This is the single biggest fall in living standards since 1956. Since records began, actually. I was looking at a report Unite commissioned, came out last Friday. Some of you may have had a chance to have a look at it. And it documents the whole issue of inflation and where it comes from. And it absolutely pierces the lie that this is anything to do with workers' wage demands. On the contrary, workers' wages have declined in real terms by something like 25% over this last 12 years. The inflation approaching 11% is primarily due to profiteering, executive pay, and of course, supply problems in relation to energy and other commodities. But executive pay has increased in relation to the top 350 Financial Times index companies. Executive pay has increased by 29%. 29% in the last 12 months, from an average of 2 million to now an average of 2,590,000. So let's get this absolutely clear. We know that we have to take these arguments on head on. We have to explain to people that the problems with inflation have got nothing to do with workers and everything to do with bosses. And if we want to cut inflation, then we need to cut profits and we need to cut executive pay. And we need to support all workers in struggle across the board. And their demands for inflation-rated pay are very moderate indeed. And the idea that a trade union would accept compulsory redundancies as part of a negotiation, I think is anathema to the whole trade union movement and whole ethos of trade unionism. Mick made a point recently in one of his interviews where he said that the bosses want them to beg, not to bargain. And I think we have to bear that in mind. We have to say loud and clear, workers are not in the business of begging. We bargain, we sell our labour power, but for a reasonable price. And we need to support all of these generalised struggles and recognise that the RMT's first in, but they're not last. There's going to be a lot of industrial struggle opening up in the next weeks and months, not just in local authorities, not just in teaching, but also in private companies like British Airways. We are going to see a level of industrial struggle, the likes of which we've not seen for at least a decade or so. And that's positive. That's positive because hopefully it will raise class consciousness, will raise the understanding that we live in a society where the millionaires have become billionaires and where working people have become the working poor. I mean, think of that phrase, brothers and sisters, honestly, working poor. It's an oxymoron, isn't it? Working poor. If you're working, why the hell are you poor? Come on, we have to say loud and clear that's not acceptable in the 21st century that anybody in employment is poor. I seen the study recently in relation to some research that Prem Sika had done from the Tax Justice Network. 42% of households across the UK are living on less than £12,500 a year. £12,500, almost 50% of the population. Rishi Sunak pays £12,500 to heat his bloody private swimming pool in his house. We've got a Chancellor of the Exchequer so removed from the reality of ordinary people's lives that he's paying for his swimming pool what 42% of the population are trying to live on for a whole year. And that's the situation that we're in, which is unacceptable, unbearable, and we need to organise. However, I don't want to in any way, shape or form sound pessimistic, because I'm not a pessimistic person. But the question is posed, is this a new poll tax? Is non-payment the strategy that should be adopted? And I've got to say that yes, this is like the poll tax, but no, it's not like the poll tax. Yes, it's like the poll tax because during the era of the poll tax under Thatcher, our class was under a generalised assault. Our living standards, living conditions were under assault. Thatcher, if you remember, had deliberately picked on the nurses, she picked on the steelworkers, and then she picked on the miners. She earned a reputation for herself as the Iron Lady on the basis of the Argentinian conflict, where she took credit for defeating Galtieri. So she had a huge reputation when the poll tax was first mooted up in Scotland in 1988. But here's the rub, comrades, and this is something we have to, I think, get to grips with. The poll tax and today are two different eras and they're two different campaigns. The beauty of the poll tax, and for those of us involved at the time, if someone was to say it's quite simple, then we would have probably bit their head off. But the truth is, it was quite simple. It was quite simple. Thatcher made a mistake. Her and Ridley and co, they decided that they wanted to have a flagship policy, and that policy was going to be to change the rates on behalf of the big homeowners that supported them. But what they did that was a mistake for them compared to what they'd done up to then in relation to the nurses, the steelworkers, the miners, was she attacked us all. Now, there is a wee caveat. She chose Scotland first. We were the guinea pigs. We didn't like Thatcher, as you know. We rejected her in '79. We rejected her in '84. We rejected her in 85. We rejected her in '87. We rejected her all throughout her period in office. She hated Scotland. If you read her memoirs, you'll see that she despised us with a passion. And she decided we were to be the guinea pig for the poll tax. But the point is, she attacked all of Scotland at once. She attacked the whole class at once. And we had the opportunity, and it was difficult. I remember meetings of 4 and 5 in some communities where people's heads were down and you had to try and really convince them that we could do something because people thought, oh, you can't beat her. She's the Iron Lady. And we called on people to refuse to pay. Call for mass civil disobedience. And you look back in it now and you might think, oh, well, that was great. That was very effective. That was very positive. But it was hard because a lot of people didn't want to break the law. They were worried about breaking the law, quite understandably. However, the biggest recruiting sergeant to the anti-poll tax campaign wasn't Tommy Sheridan, Steve Nally, or any of the other individuals who played a great role in that campaign. The biggest recruiting sergeant was poverty. Poverty itself, necessity. People couldn't afford to pay, and that's why they get involved in the anti-poll tax campaign. We also had the benefit, and this is something that needs to be highlighted and needs to be pointed out. We had a great benefit. I was involved with the Militant at the time, and Militant had a network across Scotland and across the whole of England and Wales. And it had a political network in the Labour Party, yes, but a Marxist wing of the Labour Party, a very combative, educated wing of the Labour Party. That network was absolutely indispensable when it came to organising the campaign, because we could use our contacts in every part of the UK to organise meetings in communities, to set up anti-poll tax unions. And although Militant played a key leadership role, the anti-poll tax movement far outnumbered Militant. It became a huge campaign. Some of you will recall that in Scotland, after the first year of the poll tax non-payment campaign, we had 1 million non-payers. Now, we probably were lucky to have 500 or 600 members of militant, but we had 1 million non-payers. And that shows you that if the campaign is right and you have a good political leadership, you can grow something much bigger than the parts of yourself. You can build a movement that far outnumbers the weight that you carry within the movement. I recall, some of you will have been there in the March 31st, 1990 demonstration. I recall speaking in Glasgow. We had 40,000 marched in Glasgow. We were able to march to Queen's Park, and we were able to announce that we had 1 million non-payers. And then I was whisked down to London to speak in Trafalgar Square. And I remember getting there, and there was a tremendous buzz. It was a phenomenal turnout. My big friend, John Ellen, had came and got me from the station, and we'd made our way through the massed crowds to get onto the plinth at Trafalgar Square. And Tony Benn was speaking. And Tony is an inspiration, a giant, a socialist giant, undoubtedly. And Tony made the point that he was with the movement 100%, and that it was about people power. It was about civil disobedience. I was next up. I was very excited. But unfortunately for me, as soon as Tony finished, then the doors of the South African embassy swung open, and out came the massed hordes on the horses with their shields and their batons drawn, and there began the Trafalgar Square riot, as some of you are aware. But what was important about that was that up until then, there had been massive meetings, massive demonstrations. There had been declarations all over England and Wales that they were going to follow the jocks, that they were going to do what Scotland had done, that they were going to involve themselves in mass non-payment. And of course, what then transpired was that the central city of Thatcher, London, the capital of Britain, was out of control. She'd lost it. The Iron Lady, who could walk freely in Poland and be greeted by the workers in Gdansk, apparently, but she couldn't walk freely in London, and her city was on fire. And that showed that she was finished. That showed that this particular campaign, this particular issue had undone her. We put the mass non-payment into that campaign, and when Major stood up in 92, I think it was, to announce that the poll tax would be repealed, he said in Parliament that it was being repealed because it had become, and I'll quote him, uncollectible. Uncollectible. Well, who made it uncollectible? We made it uncollectible. The movement, the campaign, the people power made it uncollectible. Because not only did we ask people not to pay, but we then set about defending people. When sheriff officers were sent out in Scotland, when bailiffs were sent out in England and Wales. And therefore, the comparison with then and now is not straightforward. It's not straightforward, because you don't have a single issue, the likes of which the poll tax was. The energy hikes are absolutely deplorable, absolutely, but we don't have a single energy company. We have probably in the region of 16, 20 different energy companies supplying energy. So the idea of calling for mass non-payment of energy bills wouldn't necessarily go down as easily and be as simply communicated as mass non-payment of the poll tax was. It's not just energy, of course. You have fuel costs, you have clothing costs, you have housing costs, all of which are feeding in to this absolute crisis of living that working class people are facing. It's not a cost of living crisis, it's a conservative crisis. It's caused by them, and we have to make that point at every turn. So my contribution, comrades, from the experience, and by the way, none of us have got a monopoly on wisdom, so these are only my opinions. It doesn't mean they're accurate, doesn't mean they're true. We all have a role to play. But my argument would be that the poll tax was unique because it was a single issue. It was an issue that we could simply communicate, that we could build around, and that people knew what the action that was required was. Withdrawal of your consent to pay, and then defend people. Defend them from bailiffs, defend them when they go to court. Some, as you know, were jailed in England and Wales, including my long lost and very, very beautiful comrade Terry Fields, who was a Labour MP at the time. We had an easier campaign during the poll tax than we have just now. That's my opinion. There's one final wee complication I want to throw into the mix, and I'm going to apologise, but I hope that you'll indulge me for a moment. And that is that things have moved on in relation to the era of 88, 89, 1990. And one of the things that has moved on is quite clearly the advance of the demand for separation in Scotland, the demand for independence in Scotland. I hope that you'll understand as socialists that in Scotland, we haven't voted Tory since 1955. Since 1955. I've got to say to you guys, sadly, England voted Tory in 2015, 2017, 2019. Some of you may not be aware, but in 2015, I mean, from my point of view, being brought up in a working class household, a working class community where you were taught from the earliest possible time that Labour was your party. In 2015, the Labour Party was reduced in Scotland out of 59 MPs. They got one single MP. Today, they're still reduced to one. 2019, that's what they got, was one MP. They are finished in Scotland. And the reason they're finished in Scotland is because the working class have embraced the idea that Westminster is the problem, that we could build a better society if we weren't burdened by the corruption and the rottenness that Westminster represents. And therefore, that is an added complication to this movement. Generalised industrial struggles unite our class, England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. But when it comes to the political struggle, comrades, then most of the working class and most of the progressive elements of the working class are for independence. They want to break the British state. And why wouldn't you? Because see, if you're a socialist worth your salt, then you've got to be an anti-colonialist. You've got to be an anti-imperialist. Surely we should be saying to the left across the whole of England and Wales that supporting independence isn't nationalistic, it isn't xenophobic, it's actually progressive. I'm going to a march tomorrow. I'm speaking in the Bannockburn commemoration march tomorrow, and I'll be marching alongside people who will have welcome refugees posters, who will be saying scrap Trident, who will be saying Burns not bombs, because the independence movement is a progressive movement. And I would ask that you on the left and you as part of the socialist movement would recognise that and adopt that and absorb that in relation to the generalised struggles that we have as we move forward. So sorry to speak a bit longer than 10 minutes. I apologise for that. But if there are any questions, I'll certainly try and address them. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tommy. I mean, I take on board what you say about the differences between this campaign and the poll tax. All I would say to that really is that each campaign and each movement decides its own tactics and its own priorities, and we can't predict in advance where the social and the political and the industrial struggles will go. All I know is we have to get organised and we can't simply sit back. And the other thing really is that probably a majority of people by October, remember in October, last October, the price cap was £1,270. In 1 year, it's gone up to nearly £3,000. People simply cannot afford to pay. I mean, already 1/3 of people are behind with their bills. I imagine by next October, that will be a majority. Now, that is a basis for a campaign. Whether we can build it, whether the left can unite, whether trade unions can take that up, I think we simply don't know. But that's not an excuse for not doing anything. And the Socialist Labour Network will be distributing an information leaflet. And it really is important that people go back, if you like, to their groups and build such campaigns, because there is, I think, now a very real opportunity. Just Roger has put up his hand. So if Roger, if you want to say a few words before I close this meeting, thank you. You're muted, Roger.
I was hoping to come in a little later into the discussion. If nobody else wants to speak, I'll just make a few points now. Okay. Well, I think the RMT strike is going to be as decisive a battle as the miners' strike was in the 80s, and even perhaps the general strike in 1926. It's quite clear that the working class is rising to its feet again after a long lull, and it's being forced to its feet by the fact that it simply cannot manage, it simply cannot cope with the situation of the massive growth in inflation, and at the same time, the fact that there is a labour shortage, and which gives it the power to be able to act and to inflict some blows against the ruling class. And I think one of the factors in the situation is that the government is, apart from being vicious and monstrous in every other kind of way, it's also stupid, because it looks to me, I don't know if other comrades agree, that the government is relishing the idea of a battle, and not just a battle with the railway workers, but a battle with the entire trade union movement. I think some of them, at least, are toying with the idea of provoking a general strike, just as they provoked the general strike in 1926. And I think that's why we're seeing such intense provocations by the government. For instance, the fact, apart from anything else, that the latest in the draconic measures that the government is introducing is the sanction given to employing strikebreakers, to employing agency workers in strikes, something which even Thatcher did not dare to do. And I think a general strike, as I say, is in the air, and it's and there'll be on the basis of a deliberate provocation. But remember, the balance of forces, what they have not perhaps taken into account is the balance of forces is completely different. In 1926, the ruling class were able to mobilize a mass strike-breaking force among the middle class and even among students. Could you imagine students now trying to break the strike, to drive buses and the rest of it? Can you imagine when you look at the situation now? First of all, the youth are overwhelmingly to the left. As a matter of fact, according to some opinion polls, 70% of the youth actually declared themselves to be in favor of socialism, perhaps not knowing quite what socialism was. But there's an overwhelmingly progressive mood among the youth. And then, of course, what about the former middle class, who again were mobilized at the time of the 1926 general strike? But look now, the working class actually, it's true, it's become deindustrialized, but the working class has not shrunk in size. And actually, we have a new consciousness among a whole strata of the working population who would not have called themselves even working class in the past. Can you imagine now? You look what are the biggest strikes we've had lately? We've had university lecturers, teachers, junior hospital doctors. Can you imagine lecturers and teachers as well as students? They were enlisted to mobilize as a strike-breaking force in 26. You could not imagine that happening now. They're among the most militant strikers. 60% of people in the opinion polls have declared their support for the railway strike now. So in that context, we can see, a matter of fact, just one last figure. At the time of, in 1983, which was at the time of the huge industrial struggles, and when we still had heavy industry in Britain, the number of people who identified themselves as working class was 60% of the population. Now, what's the figure today? With the closure of heavy industry, of the steelworks, and the shipyards, and the coal mines, and all the rest of it.
Roger, can
Figure today, just last point, my last point. The figure today is still 60% of people identify themselves as working class, and that is something very different from 1926. And that's, I think, when we're moving into this battle, it's going to be an entirely different balance of forces. So thanks, comrades.
Okay, thank you very much, Roger. And you have inspired two other people to put up their hands. So I would ask Peter and Matthew if you can keep it brief, because it's now 8 o'clock nearly. Peter, can someone spotlight him? Peter May. I saw. I don't know who's doing the spotlighting, but if Peter still wants to speak, oh, Paul Collins as well has also got up his hand. Okay, well, if Peter's not being, then I will take Paul. Do we have anyone doing the spotlighting? Because I can't.
Yes, I'm doing it. I found Peter. Is Peter still there?
I don't know. He did have his hand up.
No, I don't think Peter wants to talk because he can't now talk.
Okay, well, Paul Collins. Yeah.
Okay. Paul, if you unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know where my camera's gone, but yeah. I thought that was a very good meeting, and I particularly welcome the point that Paula Peters made, because I know they don't mean to, but it's still the case that when it comes to protest, and it doesn't include those that can't necessarily get there, but
Has Paul disappeared?
I think we better take. I don't know what's happened to Paul.
the room status was changed and muted me in the protest.
That's so I could get your camera on, Paul.
Oh, okay, I should be on now. Can you see me?
Yes, you're on. We can see and hear you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I don't know what you got and what you missed, but I particularly welcomed Paula Peters' contribution, because it's clear from the TUC mark, and also in other demonstrations hosted by other organisations, that disabilities, people with disabilities are still at the bottom of the pile, and there's still a long way to go in terms of including disabled people. So I welcome that contribution, and also what you said about who will get the is it the 250 payment, and the fact that there are large numbers of other people that are on benefit, but nevertheless are not on the ones that will qualify for that payment. So I think there's something, so the campaigns along that need to continue.
Paul,
the 1926 general quake. I think we're a long way from that, because I think the TUC have still got a bit of catching up to do as a national organisation. But hopefully the RMT action will realise that they've got to start being vocal as a national organisation of collective unions, which is what they're there to do. I also think that the situation is very different in the sense that in 1926, most of the industries were in fact publicly owned. Unfortunately, we're not in that scenario. And the other important thing to remember is that it wasn't the fact that that they lost. It was the fact that the government at the time actually threw the gauntlet to the then TUC, who were much more left-wing than they are today. And the reason I believe that it failed was because they were challenged that would they be prepared to take the role of the state and take the apparatus of the state over? And the answer was no. So I think that needs to be taken into account. I would certainly like to see a big national strike of some form, but I think we're a long way there yet. And then even if you got to that stage, you then have to think about what will.
Okay, Paul, I'm going to have to wind you up now. I'm sorry.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry. The next speaker is Matthew. I'm just taking two more speakers, and then we really do have to finish because we've been going over 1.5 hours. Matthew, again, if you...
Hi guys, yeah, thanks. I think it's been a really useful meeting. I think there's a few things. I mean, I think in terms of the important thing about the RMT strike, and actually the big lesson actually of the strikes in the 80s, and what the Tories always did was to maintain isolation. They would take groups of workers on one at a time and make sure they could smash people by making sure they were isolated. And the key question really at the moment with the RMT strike is to say, okay, we need to have more than just rail workers on strike. If there's more sections of workers come out, and we have more than one strike running, a major strike running at once, and obviously that it gives us the position. I think that the other thing, of course, is in terms of what's actually going to happen this winter, which is going to be a disaster, as far as I can see, in terms of what's happened, what's actually moving. Of course, is you've got this. The other factor, of course, is the war, which is actually what has driven up energy and food prices, in which essentially the Americans and so on have actually removed, are attempting to remove from the world market the largest exporter of wheat and some other grain, Russia, and the fifth largest exporter of wheat, that is Ukraine, plus of course a number of other products. And so what you're seeing is the price of food being driven up all over the place. In energy terms, of course, Russia is the world's largest gas exporter, and actually sort of exports 40% of Europe's gas. So you're going to see a situation where obviously prices are being driven up to ridiculous levels. What we've seen is, I mean, last winter, the energy, the problem, what's happened, of course, is they've instituted the price cap. And the interesting thing, of course, is that what's happened with that, of course, is it's actually broken the entire supplier basis, because of what they did was to say, okay, we'll institute the price cap, and it meant that, in fact, all energy supply, because the industry is sectioned up into these little bits, all energy suppliers lose money. So this is why you get, whole chunks of energy suppliers have gone bust, and the ones that are left are actually losing lots of money. Even the big ones. just because of the way that obviously they say, they're making a lot of money as generating electricity or producing gas, but they're actually losing hundreds of millions of pounds to supplying the stuff. The point being is actually the question we should be raising is, one, people have the right to heat. We want essentially that all this notion of paying for energy under conditions in which people can't afford to, and which the price of energy will go from, it was 1,200 quid this past winter. It is going to be even the Ofgem have said something approaching 3,000 quid that's just for an average customer. And lots of people consume more than that in the winter coming. So lots of people just going to turn around and say, we can't pay. I mean, that is just the way the thing is. I mean, but we ought to be saying, look, people have the right to heat. It doesn't matter whether they pay for the stuff or not, because otherwise people are going to die of cold, And at the same time, people have the right to eat food. We should be saying, look, actually we require things like local councils to be looking at how do they source food over this winter, because we're going to see a mass number of people who are not going to be able to buy or pay for energy, and a lot of people are not going to be able to pay for food under these conditions. And in those terms, it's a total disaster. And we ought to be saying, look, these are basic, absolutely basic. We need to have these things to survive, and so whether or not we can pay for them, we need to have them anyway. There's various tweaks and so on. I mean, things like, the whole question of prepayment meters, and prepayment meters come in two kinds. The smart meters, which are the new ones, which can be switched remotely to credit. And we should be saying all smart meters should be switched to credit now. This is a demand we should put on the regulator and the energy company. So switch all your smart meters to credit. Because we're not having this idea of people self-disconnecting, because that of course is just another means of killing people from cold. I think there's obviously another question in terms of the old key meters, because obviously you're still going to get this issue of how do you deal with self-disconnection and people dying of cold. So I mean, in these terms, we don't have a great lot of time, and we're actually looking at a matter of months before this stuff's actually going to be a real issue. The Ofgem is going to announce this huge increase in energy prices at the beginning of August, which will come into force on the 1st of October. And we ought to be making, a big announcement saying, look, stop that. Really, we have the right to stay alive, you bastards. We don't care whether you get paid or not, but we have the right to heat to stay alive.
Okay, thank you very much, Matthew. I should point out for people's information that Matthew actually does work in the energy sector, though I believe he's been given his cards, as they say. And finally, I'd ask Carol. She's from Newham Labour, and she's been incredibly active, not least in the last local elections, where candidates from Newham Labour did extremely well in the local elections, faced with the kind of Labour council that now exists there. So, Carol, over to you, please.
Yeah, I understand why Matthew swore, because it makes me feel like that too when I'm working in the south of Newham near the docks, where a community is left behind. So I'll be very brief. I just wanted to thank the speakers. I've learned such a lot this evening. It has been a fantastic meeting. I think every single person, I've taken away little nuggets of information and ideas that are really helping me develop my thinking. So really, it's much appreciated. I just want to pick up one or two points. I'll be very brief because of the time. I think, Tommy is absolutely right. The anti-poll tax campaign, such a huge success. And it is different. There are similarities, but it is different. And we have to really analyse this and understand it, which is why, we've called the campaign Can't Pay, Won't Pay. It should be called Can't Pay, Can't Bloody Pay. We can't pay. Most people will not be able to pay if those energy prices go up to £3,000 on the 1st of October for every home. It's just going to be impossible. The situation now is that the system is in much deeper crisis than it was during the time of the poll tax. Yes, there are comparisons and it's not simple. There is, as Tommy said, no single energy company and there's no simple message. Is that right? Is there a simple message? Well, in a sense, because we're under attack, our class is under attack from every single side now, attacks in education. Kids have a horrible time in school because most of those academies are quite horrible places to be in. The NHS, social care, the welfare state is going. In a sense, then, it is a simple message that we can give people. This system isn't working. It's not a crisis of the Conservative government. It's a crisis of a system. It's the crisis of capitalism that is unable to meet the needs of basic needs of ordinary people. And ordinary people understand that. They know it. They feel it. They understand when their kids are hungry, when they can't afford decent clothes and decent shoes for their kids, when their elderly people, their elderly relatives are not getting the care they need, and when they go to hospital and they wait hour after hour in A&E when there may be 80 people before them in the queue. They understand that. They may not have all of the deep knowledge and have read Marx or Lenin or whatever, but they understand it in their bones. They also understand that the Labour Party hasn't got any solutions to them. So I think, you know, the idea that Richard came up with, which was to have, you know, an action conference and councils of action like they were formed in the general strike. I mean, I don't know that much about that, but I think we need to really know about what happened during the general strike and learn the lessons from that, because I think it is true that they may be baiting the unions and thinking, the Tories are thinking, oh, it might be quite good to have a general strike because it might, Boris in his perverse way may think it's a way out for him. Or we have to bloody well make sure that it's not. So I think we need to be practical. Working class people want practical solutions. Let's think about an action conference. Let's think about councils of actions. Let's, as Ian Hodson said, be serious-minded and get organised. Thank you.
Carol, I think that was an excellent way to actually sum up this campaign, because it's really only the beginning. It's not the end. As I say, the movement itself will determine its own tactics in the light of its own experience. We can't predict in advance. What we do know, and I think the most important thing that Carol said was that and also Matthew, was that people simply won't be able to pay. It won't be something you can decide you can or you can't, or you will or you won't. It won't be an option for the majority of people. These energy prices having gone up so staggeringly high for all the reasons that Matthew and many other people mentioned. We could be here all day discussing this. So I want to thank all the speakers. You were absolutely fabulous. Thank you very much for coming and taking part in this. And let's go back to our workplaces or wherever it is and organise. I think that should be the main message from this meeting. Thank you again, comrades. Bye.